Hi and welcome to this joint webinar between Swegon Air Academy and REHVA. My name is Mikael Börjesson. I will be the host and the moderator for today's event. Today we will have a live event and a hybrid event where our keynote speaker will join and present remotely, all the way from Valencia in Spain. I will shortly introduce the topic and our presenter, but first, for your knowledge, this webinar will be recorded. And we will also this time send out the presentation afterwards. So good to know. You need to maybe take some notes, but you will also have the pictures in between. In the end of today's broadcast, we will have time, hopefully, for questions as well. So please use the chat function and raise your topics. With that said, I'm proud to introduce our dear keynote speaker, Pablo Carnero Melero from REHVA, who will guide us into a very, very interesting topic, namely smart readiness indicators and how that will affect the building industry in the future. I will read from the introduction to this webinar. How can energy efficiency and overall in-use performance be optimized? Can buildings adapt and work with electrical grid? Can the indoor environment be changed and adapted based on the building's occupants' preferences and needs? How ready are we to assess the building's capacity when it comes to smart ready technology? Hopefully, a lot of those questions will be addressed during this presentation. And I think this is a truly inspiring topic for a lot of people around Europe. For sure, it's a top of mind in these days. Please join us when we're digging deeper into this understanding and the demands of the smart building and in all its essences. And with that said, I will not take more time for the introduction. I will just give the word and the floor to Pablo. Again, very, very welcome.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And yeah, that's a start. Thank you, Swegon Group and Swegon Academy for having me. The title of today's webinar is Future-Proof Your Expertise, particularly on the topic of smart ready buildings and the EPBD recast. So I will quickly start, but first few words on the style of today's webinar. So the idea is to have what we have called the structured insight style. So the webinar is structured in 2 blocks, 6 different topics in total. We'll have a first block with 3 topics rather on the theory side. And then we will have a more practical session in the second half of the webinar. As Michael said, the slide deck will be circulated among you. But note that the bibliography is embedded also in the slides. So look for this little icon here with the 3 dots that will be placed in the top right of the slides that have embedded links and extended bibliography for you to consult afterwards. And again, as Michael introduced, although we may have a few questions here and there in between blocks, yeah, we aim to leave the bulk of the questions to the end. So hopefully we can engage in a sort of debate afterwards. So today we'll start with the introduction. Then we'll have a policy overview on the smart ready buildings, mainly devoted to the EPBD recast that recently came into place earlier this year, but also to the legal acts that are related to it. And we will finalize the first block on a walkthrough on the smart readiness indicator, calculation methodology and framework. Then the second block will start with the SRI audit procedure. So we'll discuss the step-by-step process in order for engineers to actually assess the smart readiness of buildings. It intends to give you an overview of what the evolution of the practice would be to integrate the smartness in your day-to-day endeavors. We will follow with a practical example of the assessment tool. So what is the software? What is the digital tools that we're going to need to use in order to be able to assess the SRI? I'm very sure that most of you are familiar with the tools eligible in your context to assess EPCs or to perform energy audits. Well, new tools are needed for new assessments, and we will have the chance to present the one related to the building smartness assessment. And last but not least, we will delve into the training Um, this is actually the first time that we're going to present the syllabus of the course. The course is publicly being launched by REHVA in a couple of weeks, but you'll have the chance to have a, let's say, a sneak preview of the materials, and also you'll have the chance to already enroll if you so desire. And as I said, at the end, we will leave some time for the questions. Before I get into the details, just let me share a few words about our organization, about REHVA. So REHVA is a federation of European heating, ventilation, and air conditioning associations. It was founded in 1963 as a professional organization, and it represents over 120,000 building service engineers across 26 European countries through the national member associations, but also supported by leading HVAC companies like Swegon Group. And a few words before we end up to actually bring into value the webinar that we have here today. Both the Swegon Academy and REHVA, we are fully aware that the engineering profession, especially in this case today of smart building sector, is rapidly evolving due to technological advancements and also regulatory changes. So we feel that the university alone or the professional practice is not enough to fully prepare engineers for a lifelong career. So that is why we're here today. We come together representatives from the industry and also different stakeholders to promote this cross collaboration. So REHVA is fully aligned with this mission and this viewpoint of supporting engineers throughout their lifelong learning. Additionally, and probably there's another reason of why we're here today, is that REHVA is quite active in the participation of EU projects with the intention to bridge the gap between EU policies and their national implementation, ensuring that the latest regulatory and technological updates reach the market and actually bring the full value to the practice of building service engineers across Europe. So yeah, having said that, let's quickly start with the first topic, which is the introduction of a smart ready building. So what do we mean? What is a smart ready building? What is building smartness? So how we have it defined in EU policy, the smartness of the building refers to its ability to sense, interpret, communicate, and actively respond in an efficient manner to the changing conditions in relation to the operation of technical building systems, the external environment, but also demands from the occupants. So we're seeing already that the concept of building smartness is quite broad. It's not anymore focused only on energy performance, but also touches on several other topics, like the interlink and the reaction to signals from the external environment, and also for the demand from building occupants. And we have here a few concepts to be able to sense, to interpret, to communicate, to actively respond. So in the end, smart buildings are responsive buildings, are buildings that actually can adapt how they operate and the processes that take place within to fulfill many demands, as I said, not only energy performance. On broader sense, building smartness is not an end on its own, but is rather a means to a healthier environment and more comfortable buildings with lower energy use and carbon emissions, while facilitating the integration of renewable energy sources in the energy system. So building smartness transcends what happens within the building boundaries, and it's also able to have a wider impact on the environment surrounding the building. So we have the what, we have the why, but what about the how? So how do we make buildings smart? Well, through smart technologies. Smart technologies such as building automation and control systems are the enablers to smart ready buildings, but which building services, traditional building services, evolve to become smart ready services with smart functionality. And amidst all of that, we have the Smart Readiness Indicator, or SRI as the acronym, which is the common union scheme for rating the smart readiness of buildings. When we think of smart technologies, we can think of devices such as smart thermostats that help improving comfort, convenience, energy consumption, coupling technical building systems with occupancy detection sensors, for instance, to improve indoor environmental quality and saving energy, or adjusting the operation of heating and cooling systems, for instance, with a view to providing flexibility services to the grid. Those are only a few examples, and we will get to a lot more of those during the course of the presentation. So let me start with the second topic today after the introduction, which is the policy context. So the existing policy framework includes several recitals and dedicated provisions aiming to boost the smart readiness of buildings, further supporting the European Green Deal. So the next slides are a quick walkthrough to the past years of policy, so we understand where we come from. We will fully digest what the EPBD brought earlier this year when it was published in the Journal of the European Union. And we will also draw a few lines about the pathways, about what the EU policy sets today that will be the implementation at national level in the coming months and years. So in terms of building smartness, building smart readiness, we can set a starting date in 2017, where the first SRI technical study was published. So the European Commission hired a group of experts with a view to defining what the smart readiness indicator could be and to elaborate a draft methodology after intensive stakeholder consultation to ensure that this new scheme gathered the views and reacted to the needs and expectations of the whole building value chain. Only a year later, we had the publication of the revised EPBD, of the Revised Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which introduced already the SRI as an optional scheme, with dedicated recitals and description of the building automation and control system requirements, coupled with the inspections of such systems. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, here you may see in the top right corner an icon with a hyperlink that will take you to the official text in any of the European languages. A year later, we have the second SRI technical study, which the same group of experts, after gathering the lessons learned in the past 2 years of work, fine-tuned the SRI definition and associated calculation methodology. This took us to the publication of the Commission Delegated Regulation in 2020 with the definition and calculation methodology of the SRI. Then, and then the same year, we had the Commission Implementing Regulation, setting the modalities for the effective testing and implementation of the SRI scheme. So those are the two legal acts that I was mentioning already that, together with the EPBD, set the scene about the SRI. But on top of that, the European Commission set up the SRI platform in 2021. The aim of the SRI platform was providing technical assistance for the testing and the implementation of the SRI. So we'll delve a bit later on what this testing and implementation means. But as a proof of concept, we had that only a year after, non-committal test phases were launched. So this is quite a change of paradigm because before actually implementing the smart readiness indicator and that this very relevant piece of policy in the smart buildings, there's a chance for member states to actually test this scheme before that is put into national law. So this is truly a game changer because member states have the chance to test what impacts this could have, what are the adaptations that are needed in each of the contexts throughout the European Union before they implement a policy to ensure that it can actually transform the market and the built ecosystem as we know it today. So starting 2022, a few voluntary countries launched this official test phase with the support of the SRI platform, and many more are starting those test phases in the past few months. For instance, 2024, we had few countries that were lagging behind a bit and kickstart this test phase. But today, to this date, we have few countries that haven't yet started this. So arguably, they may be missing out on an opportunity to test this before it becomes mandatory. So this is everything that happened until now. And earlier this year, we had the publication of the EPBD recast. So this directive included dedicated recitals and detailed development of the BACS requirements and the SRI and also the inspections. So what I'm going to do now in the next slides, we are in the present now. We went through the past very quickly and we are now in the present. And the idea now is that I show you what is likely to happen, what is likely to trickle down to the national regulation based on the specific wording of the articles that we have in the EPBD. So what we have is that promptly, so this means that member states need to really, get this done very soon. All buildings shall be inspected periodically. So the member states that didn't already have provisions in their national regulation regarding this shall ensure that all buildings are inspected periodically. So at least every 3 years, when the effective rated heating, ventilation, air conditioning heat output is greater than 290 kilowatts. So this virtually is large non-residential buildings in most of the cases. And at least every 5 years, when the rated HVAC output is larger than 70 kilowatts. They shall also promote that new and majorly renovated non-residential buildings with more than 5 car parking spaces are equipped with recharging points, free cabling, and ducting to facilitate the introduction of electric vehicles, according to the requirements that the same member states need to set in each of the cases. As well, similarly for new and majorly renovation residential buildings, fast supply was about non-residential buildings. And residential buildings, the limit is set in 3 car parking spaces, but charging points are not mandated, only as a minimum requirement, the pre-cabling and ducting to prepare the infrastructure to enable a future installation of electric vehicle charging points. But before the end of this year, in principle, member states shall set the requirements to ensure that non-residential buildings with effective rated HVAC output larger than 290 kilowatts are equipped with building automation and control systems. So this means that the smart technologies are going to see a rapid surge in the member states, at least for non-residential large buildings in the coming months. By May next year, 2026, sorry, new and majorly renovated residential buildings should also integrate building automation and control systems according to the requirements set by the member states. A month later, by June, the European Commission is going to issue a report based on the lessons learned from the testing and implementation of the SRI, based on the national test phases that started in 2022, as I mentioned, and also the relevant research projects that are also dealing with this matter. So the idea is that the European Commission is establishing 4 years where, let's say, we have kind of the European sandbox where member states and research projects are encouraged to test the methodology in a way to gather as much lessons learned as possible so that can influence the policy that will follow after 2026. By the end of that year, we will also have non-residential buildings, this time existing non-residential buildings with more than 20 car parking spaces will need to be equipped with the needed EV charging infrastructure. So this is virtually 2 years from now, all non-residential buildings with more than 20 car parking spaces will need to have the infrastructure for e-mobility in Europe. 2027, the European Commission, based on the report that I mentioned that is going to issue in 2026, shall adopt a delegated act requiring the application of the SRI to non-residential buildings with effective rated HVAC output greater than 290 kilowatts. So we see already that the SRI, albeit it started as a common European optional scheme to rate the smartness of buildings, it is likely to become mandatory in 2027. By the end of that same year, we see that non-residential buildings, existing non-residential buildings, will need to have automatic lighting controls as well. 2029, December, automatic lighting controls also for smaller non-residential buildings, this time with capacity greater than 70 kilowatts rather than 290 kilowatts. And by the end of 2032, buildings owned or occupied by public bodies shall be equipped with the needed infrastructure to ensure the charging of electric vehicles. So these are all the dates that we have so far laid at the table at European level. And my intention with this blog was to, it's not necessary, of course, that you remember all of this, especially because you're having the slides and this is a lot of information, but rather to, to trigger you into the fact that smart ready buildings, smartness, EV charging, building automation and control systems, smart technologies in general are keywords that we're starting to hear more and more and that are here to stay because they're going to shape the building policy in the next 10 years. So it's really, there is an opportunity here as well, because the methodologies are not yet mandatory. So there is a chance for all building service engineers working in the field to, undergo training, get an upskill to be able to integrate this piece of of new policy, new practices in a way that you can also become more competitive in the practice in the coming years. So this is the end of the second topic, and I have one more before we reach, let's say, this first half of the webinar, which is about the SRI. Yeah,
Because
sure.
I
Yeah.
think this is a fantastic kind of um, description of the journey, and I think you very well displayed that this is a voluntary scheme for the moment. Would likely be mandatory, if I understood you right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was written as a common optional scheme in the 2018 revision of the EPBD. But what we see now, what we read in the text of the EPBD recast recently published in spring this year, is that by 2027, the European Commission needs to adopt a delegated act, which is going to make it mandatory for non-residential buildings with rated output of the HVAC systems larger than 290 kilowatts. In any case, it's a prerogative of the member states to also expand and make it mandatory for other types of buildings. That, of
Yeah.
course, is also an option. This is only the minimum requirements set by the EU legislation. Yeah.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also at least a number of the viewers of this webinar would find pre-studies on their own country based on the SRI standard. There is at least a number of countries already presented some kind of reports.
Yeah. Yeah. So well, we have a research project on this, actually, that it aims to centralize all the scientific research that we are starting to see in the different case studies. So we have case studies in Norway, we have case studies, well, Finland is one of the countries that is undergoing a test phase and is very close to finalizing it. And there's a lot of research in the topic, yeah.
Yep.
So it's very likely that there's information even on their national language on the
Yeah, but
testing
that's
already of
interesting.
the SRI,
Yep.
because this is the time to do it.
Yep.
These are the 4 years of
Yeah,
massive tests.
I think since we are based in Sweden with the headquarters, we also need to address this to our ministry because we are not in the test phase yet, but that's another story. You talk about BACs or building automation control systems and the requirements. I think you will touch into that, but can you say something about what will be the minimum level of introduction to BACs to the buildings that would need to be addressed?
I am going. I'll make a note and make sure that I don't forget in the second block,
Yep.
because we are developing the training materials, I
Yep.
said, and we aim to, bring all that knowledge that we have. That I didn't want to crowd the
Yep.
slides with a lot of details on this.
Yep.
But yeah, let's table this if you want for the end of the sixth block, and I'll make sure
Yes.
to touch on the points on the minimum functionalities that the EPBD sets for this kind of smart technology requirements
Yeah, I think that's
in
really interesting.
non-residential
But please,
and also
Pablo, I will
residential
not disturb
buildings.
you
Yeah,
anymore. So please
yeah.
continue.
No, 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 it's good. Actually, I'm going to go a bit off track here, because what you asked makes sense that I show this. Um, so this is the SRI Observatory. This is a result of a research project in which REHVA participates. Smart Square is called, and is one of the 4 projects that were funded by the European Commission to try to bridge this gap, to make that knowledge transfer from the EU policy side to the market and the different stakeholders. There's a ton of information that you can find here in the SRI about the European ecosystem, but I wanted to get your attention on this. We created the SRI transposition tracker that aims to centralize in one single spot the different degree of developments regarding the SRI in the different countries. So we see here that we have 2 countries that started an official test phase and already finalized it. So they are publishing the conclusions of that official research. We have France and we have Denmark. We have many other countries that are in the process of testing. They requested a test phase and they are in the process of finalizing that and gathering lessons learned. We have other countries that, although they did not request yet a test phase, they have active research projects in the field funded by the European Union. So we have here Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, and many others. And we have also some EU countries that are neither involved in test phase, nor they have active European funded projects on the topic of the SRI. So that is the case, for instance, of Ireland, but also is the case of Sweden that you were mentioning like earlier. So yeah, the idea here is that by clicking on any of the countries, you can learn a bit more about how the process was set up, how it was coordinated, which activities, a snapshot of what the activities that took place there. So maybe this is interesting for you to get a view about, measure the temperature about where things may be going in the different countries. And if you're curious about the keywords, the research, how things are going in that regard with regards to building smartness, we also created this building smartness research tracker where you can see the different concepts that are steering the process of legislation and also research around the topic. And if any of our members of the audience here is a researcher, we centralize all that bibliography so you can download it and have it ready to implement it in any of your research. So yeah, this is the end of this little detour that I took. But yeah, I think it was valuable. So you get a completely view of the whole landscape regarding SRI and building a smartness. Yeah. All right, so let me get back on track to the calculation methodology. But yeah, Michael, don't hesitate if there's any other point like this, or maybe somebody in the chat asks something that feels that it can fit in. I'm happy to be interrupted for the sake of keeping the debate going. All right, so I'll move on to the calculation methodology now. So we have been speaking a lot about the SRI this, the SRI that. But yeah, we have a broad concept of what building smartness is, but what are the insights of the methodology? What are we actually calculating? What are we focusing on when we say that we are assessing the smart readiness indicator of buildings? Well, the methodology is set by the EPBD recast and delegated regulation, as I mentioned earlier in the policy context topic. And yeah, it's also a kind of a game changer, because the idea has been to try to avoid repeating the mistakes that happened with implementation of energy performance certificates. Right now, energy performance certificates are quite diverse among Europe, and it's a bit hard to compare the assessments performed in Sweden, for instance, with an assessment performed in Spain, not only because the climatic conditions may be different, but also because the calculation itself, the way that the physics of the building is being modeled, the way that performance of technical building systems is performed, it is different from the different member states. So one core idea of the SRI calculation methodology is that it has the ambition to be a common European methodology. So to that end, we can distinguish already that there are some aspects of the methodology which have been called the legal framework, which are binding. This means that they shall not be modified by member states. And then we have a side of the methodology that is called the technical framework, which in principle is non-binding, and it could be adapted or modified by the member states. Although, of course, the idea of the methodology by the European Commission is that this is a result of technical studies and expert work. So yeah, EU institutions are quite confident that the technical methodology that they are putting forward is the best methodology that we could have. But that, again, is to be tested and validated by the different stakeholders and by the test phases. So moving on to this, we have that the SRI is composed by an assessment of how buildings perform in 3 key functionalities. So this means that the SRI assesses how a building or a building unit's capacity to meet 3 key functionalities. Those are energy performance and operation, response to the user needs, and energy flexibility. And those 3 key functionalities are subdivided into 7 impact criteria. And these are part of the legal framework and may not be altered by member states. Then we have that the SRI calculation is based on the assessment of certain smart ready services that are present or planned to be present at the design stage, and that are relevant for any building or building unit. You know, those technical domains are the traditional ones, we could say. So heating, cooling, domestic hot water, ventilation, lighting. But we also have the dynamic building envelope, the electricity production, storage, and optimization, and electrical vehicle charging, as well as monitoring and control systems. So these are the 9 technical domains in which the relevant services are grouped. And the 9 technical domains are also part of the legal framework and in principle may not be altered by the member states. And after that, we have that the calculation considers various functionality levels. So you can have a service that can have different degrees of smartness. So different functionality levels that range from level 0 or non-smart to maximum smartness. Then, depending on the different functionality levels, some scores are attributed to prime, higher functionality levels, and some weighting factors are applied. So scores are obtained per technical domain, per key functionality, and they result also in an overall SRI score for the building. So the European Commission, through the SRI support team and the SRI platform that I introduced in the second block, in the second topic, has made available a technical framework that is composed of a default service catalog. So this means a collection of smart ready services and functionality levels, and an assessment tool that has been released in a spreadsheet format that I will show just in a minute, and that many European projects are adapting or transferring to web environments to make it more user-friendly for engineers to work with it. This technical framework is presumably the base for national implementation, although according to the current writing in the EPBD, this is open for adaptation for the member states. As an example, we could see that imagine that we have the ventilation technical domain. The ventilation technical domain is divided in different smart ready service groups, assessing, for instance, what is the capabilities in terms of controlling the airflow, controlling the air temperature, providing free cooling or no, and providing information to occupants and building facility managers. So if we were to focus, for instance, on the airflow control, 5 functionality levels are defined in the default methodology, which range from only manual control or no ventilation at all. We can have clock control, so controlling the operation of the ventilation systems by means of schedules. That would be an increased functionality level compared to only manual, but is less than the following functionality levels, like having occupancy detection control, or demand control ventilation at a centralized level by means of IAQ sensors, or to having that parameterization of the environmental quality localized in each space or room in the building. Then different weighting factors will be applied, and those weighting factors are public, are part of the default methodology, and could be fine-tuned by the member states. And in the end, several scores are obtained by technical domain, by impact criterion, by key functionality, and in the end, we would have a rating or label of the smartness of the building. Again, similarly to the one that we have now with EPCs, but this one focused on the smartness. So this is the calculation methodology. These are the details, the ins and outs of how the methodology is structured. And we realize that it's an asset methodology. So it doesn't value how buildings work on an operational level. It doesn't take measurements, for instance, of the real-time indoor environmental quality, but rather is an asset assessment. It evaluates the existing technologies and capabilities that are present in the building with a view to stating how potentially smart a building could behave and operate. So this is just a calculation framework, but when the SRI becomes implemented at the different member states, there are other bits that need to be applied beyond the calculation methodology. For instance, member states need to decide if the SRI scheme is implemented on their national territory or only on parts of their national territory. That is the prerogative of the member states. Also, for instance, if the scheme is only going to be applied to certain categories of buildings, member states need to decide whether this scheme is going to be optional or mandatory. However, we need to keep in mind that by 30th of June 2027, we said already that the European Commission is going to adopt a delegated act requiring the SRI to be applied to non-residential buildings with effective HVAC rated output greater than 290 kilowatts. Member states also need to set a control system to ensure that the SRI assessment that are put out there are of enough quality. And to this end, they can rely already on the independent control system that they may have for energy audits or for energy performance certificates, for instance. Experts need to be qualified. So member states need to set accreditation and qualification schemes to ensure that SRI assessments are issued only by accredited experts. And to this end, we will see later the training that we propose in terms of the competences that we feel are likely going to be needed by this new workforce that will become SRI assessors. Of course, the certificate issue will have also some terms and conditions of use. In principle, they should be renewed every 10 years. And yeah, there are many other provisions that need to be taken into account with regards to the content, for instance, of the SRI certificate and how they have to be displayed in a similar way like we have today for the energy performance certificates. And last but not least, as any piece of legislation, member states need to establish the protocols to monitor and promote it. And again, they can rely on existing infrastructure that they may have already for energy performance certificates or energy audits, for instance. So yeah, this is the SRI. And again, I'll restate something that I have said already a few times during the presentation, that the time is very ripe now to become acquainted with the methodology and to test it, especially from the member state level, but also from the professional side, because this is coming very soon. And now we have a few years where we are not mandated to use the SRI, but that we can voluntarily use the SRI and get upskilled, get some training to ensure that we are familiarized with the methodology, that in any case, starting 2027, it will become mandatory throughout Europe for large non-residential buildings, and who knows if for other building categories in the different member states. So with this, I end the first block. That was more theoretical. I hope it was, that we have our audience still with us. And yeah, after this, we'll be ready to bring to the more practical sense so you can see also the different supporting tools and methodologies that REHVA has developed to try to support building service engineers, which in the end are our associates in bridging this knowledge gap. But I don't know, Michael, if you would have any questions or there's something in the chat that wasn't clear that you'd like me to revise, I'm happy to do it, or we can leave it for the end.
I can't see anything in the chat yet, but please, it's still a possibility for you to write in questions. But I have some, maybe it's more kind of repetition to what you just said. But if I understood right, you have 9 fields that you actually will evaluate or assess, and you will show it probably just very quickly in the more practical way. But you say also that there could be local adaptations. So the different countries can decide the weighting percentage, or could they even choose from this 9?
Yeah, so that's a great question actually, and we are already starting to see that in the conclusions that member states get after the testing. Member states can decide whether some technical domains are mandatory or not mandatory. For instance, it may be the case that in Sweden, having a very smart cooling system is not a top priority. So it is possible that Sweden, for instance, decides you can assess the smartness of your cooling system because maybe you have a gym, let's say, where you actually need that kind of installation. But I'm not going to penalize any buildings that don't have a cooling system. So that is the prerogative of the member states. They can decide whether they implement everything as mandatory or that they can pick.
Yeah.
And they can even decide this is going to be mandatory for some categories of buildings. And I'm going to lower, let's say, the requirements or the scope of the assessments, for instance, for residential buildings.
Okay.
So that is the prerogative of the member
So what you're
states.
saying is the methodology is the same for everyone, but the kind of measuring or assessment points can vary between member states.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
I'd say it's very modular in a way that you
Yeah.
can take
Okay.
pieces in and out. You cannot fundamentally change it, but member states have some degree of freedom regarding whether they fine-tune the methodology. The same goes for the weighting factors.
Okay.
Maybe a member state with a lot of renewable electricity capacity wants the smartness to be more correlated with providing energy flexibility services and less to the energy performance because they already have energy audits and energy performance certificates. So a member state may say, building a smartness in my context is going to be significantly linked to the capabilities of providing flexibility services or
Yep.
respond to building occupants. Or on the other way around, maybe a member state wishes to reinforce the energy performance because they didn't get the results, for instance, in terms of building renovation that they wished in the past years. So they are going to, turn the screws a bit more and make the weighting factors favor, let's
Yep.
say, the key functionality related to energy performance operation and
Yep.
maintenance. So that fine tuning of the weighting factors, it's also a part of the technical framework and it's open to adaptation by the
Okay.
member states.
And then you actually already answered my second question, that you can have alternative schemes parallel to SRI, which you actually said you can have. So really good. So I am really looking forward to the more practical demonstration now. So Pablo, please.
Yeah, I'll go ahead to ensure that I don't miss anything. And in any case, if I, tiptoe on something and you would like to for me to delve any further, my contact will be at the end of the slides, and I'm happy to accommodate any request by any of our audience to have a follow-up maybe. So yeah, let's start with the SRI audit procedure. So what does it mean? How a professional needs to conduct him or herself when conducting an SRI of a building? So to that end, the Smart Square project that REHVA is partnered of, we are developing a Zen worship agreement, which is I would say, the basic step before creating a new standard to support professionals in having a comparable strategy on on-site SRI building audits. That's how we have called it. So delivering high quality smart readiness indicator assessments, we feel that requires systematic auditing of the smart ready technologies present in a building or a building unit. So what we have done is taken the standard, the European standard on energy audits, and we have adapted it to performing a smart readiness assessments. So yeah, we have the preliminary contact where all the parties need to be identified. So the building owner, facility manager, we need to establish the aim, scope, and boundaries to ensure that the next steps are performed according to the contract or agreement with the contracting party, which is likely going to be the building owner. A startup meeting should take place to identify the reference contact person that in this case is likely going to be the facility manager or the building manager, that person that has been in the building for quite a few years and knows the ins and outs of how the systems operate. And eventually those facility managers could even become SRI assessors themselves, provided they undergo the necessary training. Data collection. So as the SRI is an asset assessment, a lot of documentation should be gathered in a way to ensure that the systems and the control capabilities are fully characterized. But of course, a field visit is also required because we all know that sometimes the information is not kept up to date in the records of the buildings and building logbooks. So it's always good to get a feeling, but then confirm and double check that the data that was gathered actually corresponds to the reality of the building. And then to input all that data into an assessment tool that I will be presenting just next, an example of the online tool that we have devised in the EU project. But basically, the analysis bit, is related to actually assessing the smart readiness indicator of a building. And in the end, of course, prepare a report, gather the findings in a format that can be relevant for the technical people, but also for the executive personnel that is likely going to be making the decisions related to any renovation of the building or smartness improvement actions. So this is in a nutshell what we propose. And as you see in the top right corner, a more detailed documentation on the Zen worship agreement that is currently in draft status. It's in the making. but it's going to be published in March next year. So yeah, stay tuned for more information on this in case you're curious. Yeah, so let me quickly go to the SRI assessment. So I have still 5 minutes to show you the training, and then we can have some questions. So the SRI assessment, very quickly. So we have the Smart Ready Go tool that has been produced by the Smart Square project. And let me show it to you because I have it right here open. It's open access. I'm already logged in for the sake of time, but anybody can access to the smart-ready-go.com. You also, have the link here embedded in the slides. And the idea is that, you access it and you can start creating a new project. Creating a new project starts walking you through the different administrative information that you need to provide to identify the building, and then you go on to make the assessment. I pre-prepared some administrative information of made up building, so we can move quickly. But the first question that you need to ask is which domains are present? Which of the 9 domains that rule the assessment of the building are present in the case that you are currently assessing? So for instance, it can be an office building with no domestic hot water, but yes, heating. It may be because it's in Sweden, we don't have cooling. We have ventilation, we have lighting, dynamic envelope, electricity, and monitoring and control. And maybe we don't have an electric vehicle. And depending on whether having an electric vehicle has been decided as mandatory by the member state in which this building is, this would be a decision that would be made by the member states, but this tool is used to provide support to the member states. So you can see how the score changes if you penalize a building that doesn't have certain equipment, or if you leave it free. This is the case, for instance. If we don't mark this, if you don't have a cooling system, that's fine because it's not mandatory. But if you don't have an electric vehicle charging station, and this service was labeled as mandatory in the Swedish case, for instance, you will be penalized for not having that. So you could save that, and then you could start going for the assessment. And the kind of questions that you get asked to assess the SRI, for instance, we go to ventilation, are questions on the control capabilities, on how the building can, like we were saying, sense, interpret, and actively respond to certain events that may be happening. So how is the supply airflow controlled at the room level? For instance, do we have demand control ventilation that is able to adapt the supply air at the room level? Maybe we do have it, or maybe we don't have it. And that is how you walk through the assessment. You start defining the functionality levels that you have. It's possible that you have more than one. Maybe you have part of the building hasn't been renovated, and you have just a schedule functionality, and maybe that represents 25% of the area of the building, but another part was renovated and you have centralized demand control of the ventilation, and that covers 75% of the building. And that is how you would walk through the assessment. That is the kind of input data that you include. And as a result of that, if we were to complete everything, you would get the results of the assessment with scores, like we were saying, per technical domain, per impact criterion, per key functionality, and also the final class or label or score for the smartness of the building. Yeah. So that is the feeling. It is going to be most likely a web application. At least that is how we have adapted the default methodology. The default methodology is this spreadsheet that was prepared by the support team of the European Commission. So we feel that the work that we did significantly increases the user experience, but that's only our opinion. But yeah, in the insights, this is everything that you have is the methodology prepared by the European Commission to support member states from getting acquainted with it. I will jump back to the slides because yeah, we only have a few minutes. I would like to have at least 10 minutes of questions. But as I said earlier today, we have prepared a training. The training is not yet live. It's undergoing the final revision, and it will be published in a couple of weeks. But yeah, you have here the link already, and actually the link is up and running, so I will show it. If you want to access the training, if you already want to enroll, and I would, really encourage our audience today to do it, you can create an account. It's completely free through this link here, and you will be able to access all the materials. And the materials, we have prepared 3 blocks. So we have a welcome block where similar information like the one that I gave in the first bit of my presentation is provided. And then we have a walkthrough of each of the technical domains and functionalities. So it may be hard for you right now at the top, if you just learned about the SRI to perform an SRI assessment, maybe you need some help in identifying the actual meaning of the different functionality levels. That is precisely what our training does. So it will walk you through the different parts of a ventilation system according to the standards. And yeah, you can, it's quite user friendly. We believe we did a lot of effort in preparing this material so they are attractive. And you can learn, what does it mean to have a functionality level number 0? Well, this is explained and an example is provided, so it can be easier for you to actually absorb this piece of knowledge. And in the end, we will have a few questions to check your knowledge. And at the end of the course, there will be an exam and a practical case to be made with this tool. And a certification will be issued by REHVA. That can be included in LinkedIn and anywhere. So the idea is that you become an SRI expert before the SRI is mandatory in your context. So that is the idea, that you can gain this competitive edge, let's say, before the assessment and the requirements are mandatory, so you're prepared in advance. That is our motto, and I would like to finalize the presentation with that message. And yeah, happy to take any questions now. I went a bit over, but we have 8 minutes to openly exchange, and I'm happy to revisit any of the materials if I was too quick on them.
Don't worry, Pablo. We will have time. And we got some questions in the chat, so I will actually pick them from top to the bottom. I will read them out, so even people who can't see the chat will understand. So the first question, please, Lars, could you scroll it down so I can read? Thank you. As someone from the HVAC industry, I often have problem explaining the importance of good indoor climate because it's invisible and hard to evaluate, especially financially. What are your thoughts on how to use EPBD and SRI to make the indoor climate visible and demanded by everybody?
It's a very nice question, and actually that is one of the topics that we are addressing in this Zen worship agreement that I was mentioning earlier. So let me put this as a relevant slide. Yeah. At this moment, the EPBD doesn't force any smartness upgrade to be cost optimal. There's not today a methodology defined at European level to describe the cost optimality of smartness upgrade, which would include the enhancement or the improvement of indoor environmental quality. So that is indeed a gap that we have. There are methodologies to monetize the energy savings. There are even methodologies to monetize the flexibility services provided to the grid. But we still today have a gap in the standardization because there is not a standard enabling us to translate into economic value the improvement of indoor environmental quality across different building categories. So I'm not going to lie to you, the current methodology doesn't provide that. It's just going to be an asset assessment on the SRI. However, and I said that I would do that, and I almost forgot. Yeah, when we go on the provisions that we have on the building smartness, the technology requirements, when we speak about the BACS capabilities, so these BACS requirements that I mentioned that are going to be mandatory by the end of this year, we have also that by May 2026, monitoring of indoor environmental quality needs to be in place for all non-residential buildings. So this is indeed an effort that we need to make, because in the next 2 years, we need to come up with clear methodologies, clear messages to convey to building owners and occupants about the value of indoor environmental quality. Because in 2 years' time, it's going to be mandatory to have monitoring regulation systems for indoor environmental quality in non-residential buildings. So we need to do this pedagogical exercise before this becomes mandatory. So the value is seen and it's not perceived as an imposition on building owners and building occupants. And that is indeed a task we have. I have my personal opinion on how to do that, but yeah, in terms of EU methodologies, we don't have any at the moment, I'm afraid.
But I guess you could say that SRI anyway makes the indoor climate visible. What we are missing, the missing link is the monetary part, the transformation to financial assets. So anyway, this is a good
In,
start for that journey.
indeed, indeed, it is because yeah, as I said, let me bring it back here to the slide. The SRI is giving visibility to the response to user needs. So you will have a better SRI score if your building provides more information to the occupants, if it's able to, provide services related to health, well-being, and accessibility, comfort, convenience. So it's already that responsiveness to user needs, which in the end is indoor climate. In essence, is one of the three key functionalities. So yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
I will move down into the question list, and maybe this is make more sense to you than to me, but I read it out anyway. Do you know how much this tool that you show differs from the tool developed by within the project of SRI to market?
Um, it's a great question because REHVA is also a partner in the SRI to Market project. Um, so the tool is the same because the tool it differs in the operability. One tool is open access, for instance, but the other one is linked to the training. So it has a great quality assurance process, for instance. But in essence, in the back end, both tools have the methodology from the European Commission.
Yep.
So it is not like they are fundamentally different. However, at the moment, I believe that the SRI to market tool has in place a badge system of insignias that you can get a gold certification and so on. And the SRI to market project is actually working on a common data model to bring EPCs and the SRI together in the same assessment with the ambition to the same assessor when you visit the building might as well retrieve input data both for the energy performance certificate and also for the SRI and that is one of the courses and the value that SRI to market project
Yeah,
is following, for
great.
instance. But yeah.
So I will shoot the next question. Are the different automation levels for heating, cooling, etc., identical to the ISO 52120-1?
I would say 90% yes. That standard and also the 17609 have been the basis for the methodology. However, the 52120 does not consider the increased capability of being able to provide this functionality, so flexibility services to the grid.
Mhm.
So if you compare the functionality levels in the standard and the functionality levels in the default catalog, you will see that for some services, the SRI default catalog has one additional functionality, that is being able for the systems to automatically react to signals from the grid. There may be other differences, but that is the main one. Yeah.
Good. Thank you for that answer. Sustainability is now a big word, along with the decarbonization of buildings. How can EPBD and the implementation of SRI help?
Well, I think this has been around the webinar, and I think I'm going to stick to this slide to explain this. I think the SRI is starting to widen the scope. For a long time, the EPBD has been, and it's even in the title, energy performance. It has been focused on energy performance. However, we know that healthy buildings are much more than that. Not only have to be energy efficient, but they also need to be able to respond to the needs of the occupants. In essence, the original purpose of the buildings are to provide shelter, but since then we have come a long ways. So They need to provide, they need to be responsive to the buildings, to the occupants. Occupants need to feel empowered within their buildings. They need to be able to control what happens there and to ensure that they have a healthy and comfortable environment. And not only that, but buildings also need to look beyond their envelope to be able to react to external signals, not only of weather that the building adjusts if tomorrow if we're going to have a colder day than today, that the building prepares in advance, but also why not interact with greater networks like district heating networks or the electricity system, for instance. So that is, I think, what the SRI is doing, is widening the scope,
Yeah.
while not forgetting that energy performance remains a core aspect. It's including at least two new key functionalities to
Yeah.
widen that view.
I think the next question actually touch into this more or less in reality. The question is there is a risk that member state will focus too much on particular technical factors and up with an energy efficient building, which is not so healthy for people? In reality, you
Yeah.
responded to that in the more broader perspective. Maybe you have some more comment to that.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, that is a risk that is identified. And we shouldn't forget that while we're undergoing this testing of the scheme in the next 2 years until the Commission issues that report, after that report, we'll have a delegated act. And that delegated act can do many more things than just making the SRI mandatory for non-residential buildings. For instance, based on the lessons learned, that delegated act could even force or limit further those adaptations, or maybe even provide more. So I'd say that these 2 years are crucial to give the final shape of the methodology. So we need professionals testing the methodology. We need professionals getting acquainted with the methodology. We need to gather as much knowledge as we can to ensure that we can influence the policy in a way that is effective, responsive to the different needs of the different member states, cultures, behaviors of stakeholders, and building stocks that we have throughout Europe. So
So what you
that
say,
risk
the
is
test
there,
pilot that's
but
been
we have
conducted is
time.
very important then. Yeah.
Sorry?
So in that sense, the test pilots that have been conducted is very important then to also provide the decision points for ministries or decision makers.
Yeah, not only the official test phases, which indeed are a crucial part,
Yeah.
but also the activities. For instance, this training that I showed has been prepared by one of the research projects. And the research projects, we are in close contact with the European Commission, DG Energy, the EU bodies, because we are, let's say, we have the we are sensing what happens in different contexts in Europe.
Mm.
Those that are participating in the test phase, they're always looked at. But for instance, in the case of Sweden, if Sweden hasn't pursued yet a test phase, by getting by exchanging with the European projects that are gathering lessons learned with through stakeholders like REHVA in this case, there's also possibility to channel those inputs that we can bring it to the table and
Yeah.
ensure that we have a wider input to influence the policy that is going to shape the practice in the future of the next 10 years at least.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. The final question before we close it up, a little bit more in detail. I touched into that a little bit before. So the question is, which group of weightings will remain by default, and which one could be EU country specific?
In principle, all weighting factors are open to adaptation today. We don't know what will happen after 2027 when the delegated act is published. Right now, the default methodology includes weighting factors that are based on the type of building, so residential, non-residential, and on the climate. But that's a very coarse division because it says North Europe, it says West Europe, it says South Europe, Northeast Europe. Well, probably there are a lot of differences even within countries, right? So again, these are bits of the methodology that right now is the moment to test it, to see,
Mm.
okay, the default weightings are giving results that are not applicable in a particular region of Spain or in Sweden because we have this particularities. So yeah, that information needs to flow from bottom up to ensure that this is informed so that the common European methodology has the benefit of being able to compare and have a level playing field across Europe, which is great for the progress of industry technology. But also it has the potential risk of being too rigid in a way that it's not applicable in certain contexts. So to meet the top down, bottom up situation, information needs to flow both ways. And so yeah, that's a message that I will leave there. That
Yeah,
we're having a unique opportunity. This wasn't the case with energy performance certificates to have this chance
yeah.
of testing it so long before it became
Super.
mandatory
Great
or
answer, Pablo.
mandated.
And I hear your call to the industry to engage, and both engage within REHVA and the trainings that you will conduct in a couple of weeks, but also engage country by country in reality to really be specific in what is needed to do a correct assessment on from a member state perspective or a certain geographic expecting. But that, I think we're closing up the question part. Thanks, Pablo. A big hand from me for your contribution. I think it's been splendid. This is a perfect message from an Air Academy point of view, and hope I'm so glad that we can do this together with REHVA. Thank also all the listeners listening into this. As said before, the webinar are recorded, will be published on the Swegon Air Academy webpage. Please send the link to your colleagues because this message needs to be spread. This knowledge needs to be spread. And also the good links that Pablo already presented in the presentations, the more in-depth knowledge. So really thank you, and happy to have you with us. I also urge you to follow the Swegon Air Academy, the LinkedIn page, the web page, sign up to the newsletter to get information when the recording are available, or get new information what is happening in the HVAC sector. I will also take the opportunity to invite you all to the next webinar from Air Academy. It's the 14th of November, where we will present the topics of the importance of monitoring advanced HVAC systems to optimize energy efficiency and indoor climate. This webinar is based on a case study called The Blue House with Green Ambition, and it actually fits extremely well to the subject presented today. So it's been more a practical hands-on from a case study perspective, where probably the SRI methodology would be a perfect setup to just evaluate the smart readiness of the building. And by that, I thank you for listening in today. Welcome back, of course, and thanks for following Swegon Air Academy. And again, thank you, Pablo.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for this.